Hey everyone, it's Alan over at Cobblers Plus, and in today's video we're going to be working on a pair of Allen Edmonds Strandmoks in the blue color. So come join us and check out what we have for you today. So thank you for joining us, and like I mentioned, we're going to be working on these blue Strandmoks in this video today. We're going to be resoling these with something a little bit different, considering that it's a Strandmok. I can't talk. We're going to be putting on the Vibram Christy Sole, this guy right here in the neutral color or natural color. I always forget whether they call it neutral or natural. A few of them they call it different. I think this one's neutral. But yes, I know some of you are saying, what? Those are blue. Why are you putting the light color on, not the black? Well, the gentleman requested it, and he wants a little bit of color contrast, so why not? You know, hey, sometimes it's fun. It's like the Red Wings I've been trying to finish out forever with the purple sole on it. So you can do whatever you want. I've got another gentleman with a pair of vintage Florsheim Imperials I'm working on that also have crazy stuff going on for us. So you can really do whatever you feel like. I am going to have to reach back in my drawer here, and the tripod's in the way, so give me just a second. Sorry, my drawer is kind of in the way of the tripod if I open it, and the tripod's in the way of the drawer, basically. So, but at this point, I mean, really we're just going to be tearing this down. One thing before I really do tear these down, I do want to mention that a number of people over the years, and I mean this has been going on since I've been a cobbler, since I've been learning the trade and everything. It's a very common occurrence with Allen Edmonds in particular, and a few other brands that do a similar way of securing heels. Allen Edmonds has a tendency to secure most of their heels from the outside, but it happens when heels are secured from the inside using gripper nails. Now these nails are usually either hammered in or pushed in or hammered in, and what happens is on a lot of gentlemen's heels, ladies' heels, you get that little bit of a separation. You can see that small crack right there. So that's actually fairly normal, and as you can tell, this thing isn't really coming off. I mean, it can happen in any given moment, and especially when you have a combination of whether it's a leather stacked heel base, a fiberboard like this one is, or a plastic one, and it's being adhered to a rubber. You got to remember that rubber doesn't have a tendency to adhere as well as, you know, some other materials like leather to leather. So leather to rubber doesn't like to adhere as well. Now that's why usually most of the rubber soles are stitched, or you have a midsole that's a composite material that acts as a buffer to adhere the rubber. Certain compositions of rubber just don't adhere as well as leather, or say like this stuff here, for example. This is a crepe material, has rubber in it, but it's got other materials in it as well. So just bear that in mind. I want to really point that out, that don't freak out. It's not a big deal. I mean, if your heel does pop off, obviously then that is a big issue, and you want to get that into a cobbler as soon as possible. But otherwise, usually it's not a big deal, because those gripper nails really hold in place. If it pops off, then that may have been a missed nail down. Basically, they forgot to put the nails in. So that kind of happens, and it's a shame. It can happen with, you know, $100 pair of shoes or $1,000 pair of shoes, or it could happen from a cobbler too. We had one of our guys a long time ago, he forgot to run some nails in on a pair of Western boots, and on Western boots obviously the heel blocks are much bigger, and not running nails in through those, sure enough they were going to come off, and the gentleman came back in and a little bit frustrated. Thankfully he wasn't throwing the boots around, but he wasn't happy. He's like, I just picked these up. I'm like, oh man, geez, okay, I'm so sorry. So we had to take care of it. Obviously, we're going to stand behind it. Sometimes mistakes can happen, even from the best cobblers in the world, best shoemakers in the world. Things happen. Don't freak out. It can be fixed. At least it wasn't basically, you know, the whole shoe fell apart. You know, single part falls off, okay, that's one thing. But if it's, you know, something major that can't really be fixed, then that's a bit of a concern, in other words. But heel blocks, as you can tell, there are the nails right there underneath, so they were nailed in from the top. I've been noticing some of the models that Allen Edmonds has out there, if they've got a Dainite Sole on them, they've started nailing them from the inside. Seems a little bit more secure, which is also interesting at the same time, considering that they didn't do that before, but they're starting to now. I don't know, I guess their designs have changed up a little bit. So fun fact, I guess, I didn't realize that. I actually came across a pair not that long ago. I probably should have recorded it, but I came across a pair that had a removable insole. So the inside, this one has a removable insole also, surprisingly, so they technically could have nailed it in from the inside, but it had a removable, not insole, but a heel pad. It had a removable heel pad, meaning that it's just a leather, had a piece over here somewhere, there it is, heel pad, which is one of these, thin old leather like that, and it goes in on the inside of the shoe like that, just to cover up the nails and whatever else may be going on over there. And typically you find that on Western boots, a number of work boots as well, if they're Goodyear welted, obviously. And this pair of Allen Edmonds had that in there, and you take that out, you see nail heads, so that means they nailed it from the inside of the shoe. Then start taking off the heel base or the top lift, and there are nail heads here. They nailed it from the inside and from the outside. That may sound great, but it's a little bit of overkill to such an extent that too much holes sometimes is not a good thing, and a few of the nails actually collided into each other. So what happens is when you've got a nail coming in from one side and a nail from the other, they can collide and go clunk. One goes to the side, one goes lopsided, one can snap and just kind of, you know, get in the way there basically. And so it may sound like a great thing, you get double reinforcement from the inside and outside, but it's actually not a great thing. And one of the nails was kind of at an angle and everything. Thankfully it didn't go through the side of the heel block here, be sticking out, and just wouldn't look good. It probably would have been sanded off, but then you have this ugly little silver stain looking thing, but it's part of the nail head, or the nail piece basically. So bear that in mind. It may sound great, but it isn't. I don't recommend it. Only times that we really do certain double nailing, I guess you can call it, is if we nail the heel block from the inside, and then from the outside, if we take the Daynight Heels, which I'm starting to question if these are even Daynight Heels that Allen Edmonds has been using. Definitely doesn't feel or look like them anymore, and obviously they don't have the logo either on them. But I'm just wondering if even Daynite's still making them. The soles are also a little bit different from typical Daynites that we get in as well. So something's fishy there, little fishy. But where was I? Oh, so Dainite Heels will nail in from the outside because they've got the holes there, and they're typically a little bit of a different pattern than what happens on the inside. And obviously, due to the thickness, usually those nails don't really collide well enough. You know, you really have to try to make them collide into each other. So not a big issue usually. I'm wondering if I should save the, yeah, I should probably save one of these just in case if I need to adjust any kind of heights. But the height on these, everything seems like it's going to line up. Obviously it's going to be a little bit on the thicker side all around, so just want to do a final check. Yeah, so everything's going to line up with the new midsole and everything, but I'd rather hang on to one of those heel bases. We don't tend to reuse those heel bases really ever. I mean, unless it's like some kind of weird project I'm working on for like personal stuff or experimental, it may come in handy. I guess I'm just a hoarder. I just threw out a bunch of old heel blocks from a couple of Western boot companies, and they were plastic, and I saw the box of them, and I'm like, why did I hold on to those? I never use plastic heel bases. I hate them. I hate plastic heel bases. Ugh, can't stand them. So yeah, I just threw a bunch of old plastic heel blocks out. A couple of them were fiberboard Western ones too, and I definitely don't use fiberboard on Western boots. No. You can get away on dress shoes sometimes, but even then I'm not a very happy camper about it. Like these here, they're a fiberboard. I'm sorry, I mean, I love Allen Edmonds, but sadly they are a fiberboard. They're not a stacked leather like some people would think. They're not a wood. Wood is even worse than fiberboard, actually, much worse. So I mean, if any of you are wondering why wood is worse than fiberboard, you got to think about it this way. Wood naturally is designed to absorb moisture and be able to get that moisture to travel through it or just hold it in place depending on what kind of wood it is or tree it comes from. So naturally, if it gets wet, even if you have a finish on it, there's going to be a few spots where the finish may be worn out or something. If you step in a puddle, if you get in a rainy situation or any of that kind of stuff, that wood is going to absorb that moisture, meaning it's going to expand. Once the moisture evaporates, it shrinks back down, and that kind of change, because it's now at this point dead, it was a chopped down tree, branch, limb, whatever, it has no way of restoring itself after all that nutrients and all that moisture evaporates and is gone. So in other words, that heel block can end up shrinking just a little too much and eventually gets to a point where it just cracks, starts crumbling. Another thing is that you know, out here in Colorado during wintertime, they put out that salt, that chemical salt that they put on the ground to melt snow and ice. That absorbs into the wood along with the water, and that is extremely damaging stuff. It deactivates adhesives a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it does, especially if it really gets into the core area of whatever material it just got soaked into, and it just kind of dries everything out significantly more. So you're just dealing with a huge headache and problem. Now, when you're comparing fiberboard, for example, that's pressed paper, a special type of paper, basically tree, still wood, but it's slimmed down to such a thin level that it's pretty much almost paper or cardboard almost. But they press it down so much, along with some cases sometimes a little bit of certain shoe dust as well, and particles, meaning like leathers and rubbers kind of mixed in there, and it gets pressed down and highly compressed, so it becomes much harder, and there really isn't any room for any kind of moisture or water to be able to penetrate into it well enough. Leather, however, leather heel blocks, the leather stacked ones, is a different story, just because the difference is, if you do apply any kind of edge coating, varnishes, waxes, even just a edge dressing, for example, it tends to close up those pores significantly, so you don't really have as much water penetrating into there. The other thing is, when the leather does try to expand in such a manner with the water absorption, it will expand just a tiny bit, not as much as wood will, and when it shrinks back down, it doesn't dry out to that kind of extent like wood does, where it's dry, it's dead, it's dry. Even though the leather is dead technically, you can restore the nutrients to it. I mean, you do it on leather uppers all the time anyways, and it holds up fairly well. The wood, however, you can't really restore it. You use a conditioner of some sort, even from the hardware store that's designed for conditioning wood. That wood is not going to be able to absorb it very well, you know, because you really want to coat everything. Well, you're only coating just the outside with whatever conditioner you're using, and it's not penetrating deep enough to be able to restore the nutrients. Where with leather, for example, usually only the outside edge is really going to absorb that moisture, and it's not going to travel so deep inside, where with wood it will. Conditioners, however, will penetrate leather a lot better and will get in a little bit deeper than it will on the wood. So I want to kind of point that out to everybody and let everyone know that that is a very normal thing. Now let's see, probably should start these guys out with a heel pry. Now, typically we'll use a solvent to start deactivating the adhesives, but I'm really trying to avoid using any kind of solvent because this gentleman doesn't want these conditioned. He specified that, yes. No condition, no polish, none of that. They were mailed in, and in the note said, please do not condition, please do not polish. And that's fine if you have that kind of request. Some people want to take care of it themselves and either experiment, practice, change it somehow, or they just find it relaxing themselves, and they want the relaxation. Us cobblers have to put up with the tough part of resoling and don't get to even enjoy the polishing of the shoes. But yeah, so because of that case, I am going to avoid using any kind of solvents as much as possible. And yeah, so splitting the sole and midsole at the same time away from the welt. The midsole on these that they use is typically also a fiberboard, but I think this one might be a leather actually. And usually the fiberboard ones that they use are ones that are a darker color, like a dark brown, medium brown, black, because they can cover up any imperfections. But this one, however, is leather. That's cool. It's really good. Good. Yeesh. Now this is where comes into play the cork situation. Give me just a second. My battery's about to die. I gotta swap them out real quick, and I'll show you more details about them. All right, everyone. So I ended up taking apart the other shoe as well. While I was changing out the batteries, my wife called. It's the end of the day, and I have to get going soon. Well, pretty much now, but I wanted to make sure to finish this part out for you guys and stick a couple things together so they cure overnight. So I want to show you real quick the insides. So obviously everyone knows the hot cork method. If you're watching about Allen Edmonds and familiar enough with them, Allen Edmonds uses what's called the hot cork method. Basically they have a machine that heats up cork, and the cork that they use has more rubber content in it, and so that rubber kind of melts and becomes an adhesive, in other words. But the problem is, this is the kind of stuff that happens. You can see a lot of the pieces missing. And it's not like it got all stuck on the inside here. There's only a couple little small chunks right there that went in. That's it. So there's a lot of empty spots right here, right there. So they're not filling it in, unfortunately, all the way. And the problem is that also down here in the middle where the ball of the foot is, just doesn't seem like there's enough. Now, I mean, typically, I guess that's passable and stuff, just in such a way where, you can get away with that because nobody's really going to feel it as much as the assumption. But there are a number of people out there that I've come across that say, my shoes, I've had like 10 pairs of Allen Edmonds, and this one pair is very, very hard on my foot, and the sole isn't going to do too much sometimes, and it ends up being one of those things that when you open up the shoe, take off the sole, come to find out that there's either very little cork or just way too much. Now, way too much is bad also, because what happens is when they apply that cork in there, they take a hot iron and then they press it in. But while it's hot, they're able to press down the little cork pieces just enough where they get smushed in and it settles in there. And so when it starts trying to expand and everything, and the sole is already on, there's no room for expansion, and everything's just so hard and compressed, and so there's no sponge effect, in other words. And so that's not good. I mean, here's the other one here. This one's got a little bit more cork in the ball of the foot. Yeah, it seems like a little bit more. Right here is a spot that's just missing. Like if you were to feel it around, there's not much cork there. This is not a big issue because obviously there's the shank underneath there, all these little spots, but there are just certain areas where it's just lacking, I mean, this right here, this is right underneath where the ball of foot, the main pressure is right behind the big toe. You got a lot of pressure that goes into these areas here from the ball of the foot. There's a little small gap right here, just a pocket missing. And when the expectation is that you're breaking in the shoes, obviously the cork is going to collapse from the break-in period and everything. And if there's no cork there, or if there's too much cork there, you're not going to be able to break those in. I mean, they're they're gonna feel uncomfortable. So I want to point that out to everybody. I'm not trying to dog Allen Edmonds. They're still one of my top favorite shoes out there. It's just that if you come across that problem, that may be the issue, that either there's too much cork or just not enough cork in there. And that's why, another reason why we always replace the cork. It needs to be torn out. Even if the shoes are fairly new, sometimes it's a good idea to remove that cork and just, I mean, you saw that the soles, well, the heels didn't have too much wear on them, but the soles, yeah, they didn't have too much wear either on them. But the problem is that they were starting to wear into the stitches in some areas, which is typically not a bad issue. The reason why I say that is because Allen Edmonds, they do what's called a top stitch on the Dainite Sole, and most factories do this. Even the shoes that are $1,200. I had a couple of pairs of boots in here that are pushing about $1,700, and they had a Dainite Sole original from the factory, and it was the same method of stitching. They don't channel it, so the stitches tend to wear out fairly quick, but the adhesive holds it well, especially because the midsoles on there, it acts as a buffer, and so it's a really good surface area that it binds to, so it holds up very, very well. Contrary to what I said, where rubber doesn't like to adhere, when you got a buffer like a midsole, it's going to work very well because there's a good surface area of bonding. Now if we glued just the Dainite Sole directly on like this, that's a different story, because there's a number of layers of materials here, a lot of shifting, a lot of empty spots, there's cork that's supposed to move around, so all that kind of motion and shifting and moving around might not be the best of things. Sometimes we have to do it too, just because the way the shoe or boot is designed, where it's just a Dainite Sole straight on there, but we typically channel all of our stitching so that stitch is protected for a longer period of time, and we don't have that issue where if you wear out the stitches and the glue starts to give out, it's going to all come apart. If the glue starts to give out, the stitches are still protected for such a long time that by the time you finally reach those stitches and start wearing through them, it's most likely time to replace that sole anyways. So no harm done, basically. But regardless, the methods that we use for adhering and gluing stuff together is very, very meticulous. I mean, I'm very particular about that. I have no clue why. It drives a number of other cobblers crazy. They're like, why do you go through so much steps with gluing? I'd rather get it done right the first time. There are some cobblers that they just say these are getting stitched anyways, you know, one layer of glue is perfectly fine, you know, or they put too much glue, and yeah, but I'm very, very particular. And there's a few great cobblers out there that are the same way. So I'm not the only one. I'm not the crazy one. Don't you say I'm crazy. You're crazy. Sorry, I had to say that. But anyways, I'm here by myself, so could have some fun. So I'm gonna have to set these guys aside, and actually I'll put them up on the shelf over here so they're not in my way tomorrow morning. Got a few things I gotta stick together and head home. But tomorrow morning what I'm gonna end up doing is I will remove all this cork and then fill it in with a new cork. What I'm using is rolled cork like this. Sometimes we have pre-cut versions, and when we're lucky we have the rolls of it. It's a little bit on the thicker side, which is perfect, but this is predetermined density already cork, meaning that there's not going to be a certain area or a certain spot where the cork is just too thick or bulgy, or it's too thin or something. The density and thickness is already predetermined on it, and because we're just adhering it in with a separate adhesive and not relying on any adhesives within the cork, it's going to have a much better, smoother transition of cork all along the bottom of the inside of the shoe, and that way you get the best support features, you get the best insulation, best weight distribution, shock absorption. Cork, I've mentioned it multiple times, is the ideal, you know, kind of filler for these shoes, and you know, that's my way to go. You could use leather if you want. We've got leather that we can fill it in with, but cork is my personal pick because by the time the cork finally gives out, typically it's time to resole the shoes anyways, so it holds up at least that long. Now if you're wanting to try to save an imprint of and not have to re-break it in or something like that, leather is a good way to go because you can reuse that same piece about at least 2 to 3 times and you still have that same imprint of your foot. But you do lose a number of that insulation a little bit, just well, insulation as in helps wick away moisture, as well as breathability, make it a little bit cooler, in other words, because leather is a lot denser. It'll hold up better temperature wise when it's cold. Heat wise, however, you're gonna have some issues dropping stuff here all over the place. Anyways, we'll see you back in just a minute. All right, everyone, so back here again with these. I've got the cork refilled in there, and obviously you can still see a little bit of that shank popping through, which is normal. I mean, if we try really filling it in, covering it up, there's gonna be a lump under there, and that's just not gonna be proper. And yes, I got a haircut. Got a haircut finally. My hair's been too long. Thought I'd grow it out. I thought I'd grow out the beard. I am not used to that stuff, so it ain't gonna happen. Sorry. Move this out of the way real quick. So we're gonna get the midsole on these. Alright, so we got that midsole on there. Now we've got to go ahead and hammer that out. Now, as I mentioned, the midsole is going to end up being our buffer between the shoe and this sole right here. So technically you have that option of being able to resole it without having to replace the midsole. You can have a different sole option on there if you want, like I'm doing for my Red Wings. You can have this sole put on there, and just basically about a endless variety of different sole options that you can go with. Otherwise, you know, obviously if you go for leather soles, Dainite, certain Vibram soles as well, a number of other ones, we can stitch clear through it as well. But when you want something a little bit heftier, like one of these Vibram Christys here, you definitely need something that can adhere very well. Vibram Christys tend to adhere nicely, but the problem is because there's not a good enough surface area between the cork, the midsole, and all the liner layers in between, which I'll show you here real quick. There's the welt right here. You've got those little layers that are darker. That's the upper, the liner, the toe caps, all that, and then you got the cork. You catch one little corner on this sole, and it's basically going to tear everything out from the inside. Where worst case scenario, and I'm saying worst case scenario, if you do manage to catch the corner of this sole somewhere, should grab the right side of it. If you catch this sole somewhere and it starts peeling up, that could either be re-glued or replaced. And if it does magically somehow peel off completely, you still got that midsole that protected it long enough and nothing was torn out internally from the shoe, like the cork, the shank, some of the stitching, or a chunk of the welt, or any of that kind of stuff. So definitely have to have that buffer in there as well, or kind of that midsole basically. So I'm going to stick this one on the press, the other one's in the oven there. Press everything out, press out the welt. I didn't show me removing the stitches on there. I do have the stitches pulled, obviously. I just used one of these little tools right there, just kind of plucking them out, grab some pliers and pull them out. Slow process, but a lot safer, especially on these lighter colors here. The stitch pulling wheel that we have on one of our shining machines, it spins really fast, and due to that friction and it heating up, it could end up burning the leather and darkening it up, making it blotchy, and we really don't want that to happen. So I'd rather put in a little bit of extra time and pluck them by hand. Darker colors are very easy. I mean, they don't tend to burn because there's already a dark color dyed into that leather, where the light ones, there isn't. So this is going to the stretcher. It's going to sit and cure for a little bit, and then we're going to get ready to kind of trim up all the edges here, trim it up on the machine, sanding it. Well, not quite sanding it, we're going to use our trimmer, and then get ready to stitch it. So we'll see you back in just a little bit. everyone, so we've got these all stitched up. We used the kind of the tan beige color right there, and that's what it was originally on the top. And then on the bottom, did some blue. Nobody sees it, but why not? It's a navy blue shoe with some blue laces. Nobody's gonna see that blue except for whoever's next working on it. Could be me, could be another cobbler, could be the person who owns these, who knows. Sometimes people do crazy stuff and they want to experiment themselves. So just thought I'd throw a little bit of blue on there. Now at this point, I'm just going around the edges here a little bit, just scraping them up a little bit more. Sometimes with scraping we'll use either sandpaper or, you know, scraper like that right there, or go through with a sander obviously on it. But since we've got stitches here, we don't want to accidentally nick any of the stitches with sanding it on the machine. And then sandpaper, most of the sandpaper I have, will just kind of not smoothing it out necessarily if I use the really heavy stuff, but just wouldn't do enough to this leather here that we used for the midsole. Where this scraper right here, it's got these, obviously you can tell it's very well used, it's got these claws on them. They're slightly angled like that there, and at the very end they're kind of sharpened up almost like a razor point, in other words. So really designed for scratching and scraping up the surface area for the adhesives to bond a little bit better. Not that they won't bond plenty well, but extra layer of reinforcement never hurts, as long as it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb, and this is not even going to be visible basically. So now at this point I'm just going to glue everything up, let it sit and dry, and then stick everything together, and we're well on our way. So we'll see you back in just a little bit. All right everyone, so we're all ready with these for sanding. Cut off some of that excess there, ended up letting these sit overnight to cure, and now we're gonna go ahead and sand it. But I want to mention one quick fun fact about this sole. So a lot of the soles always have their own kind of smell, I guess you can say, whether it gets overheated, burned, sanded, or trimmed, you know, just a number of different interesting things. This sole, interestingly enough, has a fishy smell to it. Yeah, for those of you that didn't know. You can't quite smell it on the sole itself, so probably when you get them in you won't be able to smell it, but as soon as this thing starts getting sanded, everyone walks by and like, why does it smell like fish? Well, it's this sole. It's been like that forever. Even after they revamped the material compositions and everything, it still has this odd fishy smell. The black color one has it too, but the neutral color especially has it, to the point where anyone walking by will notice the smell and think that there's fish nearby somewhere. And it's not like that nasty fishy smell, it's just basic aquatic fishy type. So just thought I'd mention that kind of fun fact about this sole. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Alright everyone, so basically we're done with these guys here. Got the new Vibram soles there, leather midsole. I did a little bit of edge touch up with some Saphir Medaldio Pomander cream. It's the light brown. It ends up showing a little bit lighter basically on these edges because they're smoothened out a fair amount from the sanding and everything, so it's not going to turn out too much of that orange color or anything, but it matches that welt very nicely. So got that taken care of. Afterwards, obviously I have to go through with some acetone and kind of clean it off the sole, just those little small fine details of trying to make sure it looks good. Now just clip up some of these loose threads everywhere, and we're pretty much done at this point. We're not going to do anything for the upper by request, obviously. Typically we'll throw at least a little bit of a conditioner on there, but the gentleman did request not to treat or condition the uppers or anything like that, because some people like to do it themselves. They want to, you know, try their new product out themselves, or they have a very specific way that they want to do it and they want to, you know, perfect it, or, you know, they just prefer it to look like this. You know, there's actually a few people out there that prefer to have a beaten up looking shoe sometimes. I mean, these are in great shape, there's not too much going on with them, but that's all up to the owner of these shoes to decide what he wants on them. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and don't forget to subscribe and share the video as well, and hit that notification bell icon to be notified when we have our next video out, and we'll just see you next time.